I didn't feel like I was as good of a player as I needed to be in order to quote unquote make it. And I think a lot of performers had master's degrees to like deepen the skills, like the musical aspects. So it is harder because you have to really forge your path, and like those skills are not taught in higher education. Like you're taught how to be an orchestral musician, but you're not taught like, here's how you can go find grant funding to support, or here's how you can form this, and like this is what it takes to put on a production. Like there was maybe some survey courses that were kind of maybe being offered towards the end, but not particularly. It was like, you just need to become a better player because it's highly competitive.
Hi, Dannielle. Welcome to Recovering Musicians. I know you as a friend, but also as a performer and a fundraiser. And I'm interested to hear how you've been combining those interests over the years. Currently, you are Director of Development at Baltimore Corps. And I thought we'll start talking a little bit about that and maybe come back to Baltimore Corps at the end of the interview as well. I was wondering if you had to describe the organization to somebody who doesn't know anything about fundraising or anything about Baltimore City, how would you describe the organization?
I think in a nutshell, Baltimore Core connects talent within Baltimore City and the greater region to opportunities. So whether that is developing talent to work in social service careers, because there's not a great pipeline from education or higher education into those sectors, or giving people seed funding to get their ideas off the ground. It's kind of identifying gaps. There's an immense talent in Baltimore City, and getting people to where they want to be and to develop their careers and ideas.
I'm wondering what attracted you to that type of work. Like, have you always been community and equity conscious? Equity in the sense of like equal opportunity for all people, as I understand it.
Yes and no, I would say. Obviously, coming to Maryland and Baltimore in particular was definitely very different than where I grew up. It's definitely much more diverse as far as people, gender identities, etc. And so seeing that reflected here versus where I grew up in West Michigan was very different. And then I think for me, which your discussion about recovering musicians and trajectory, what drew me to the organization and its work in particular, as far as from a community focus, was the gap between education that is given to high school students or college students, and then there is a gap between there and then actually entering whatever field they choose. And the same is abundantly, if not more glaring, I would say, for artists. There is a large extreme lag between training artists and particularly musicians for the career that's actually out there. And so that really resonated with me because I was seeing that, I was feeling that. I always knew my path would not be traditional, and then dealt with a lot of inner conflict. And seeing that in other people, it really was something that I was like, this is a desperate need.
I wanted to take us back where it all started, to Rockford, Michigan. I saw some pictures and it looks very pretty. It seems like it's a city on a river called Rogue River. Mm-hmm. Was it a scenic place?
Yeah, it's pretty rural. I actually grew up in Grand Rapids, like in kind of a similar area to where I'm living right now in Baltimore, but we moved to Rockford when I was third grade, I think. So yeah, much more scenic. It was more rural at the time. But a lot of people living there. So like my parents' house is like on maybe a third of an acre or bigger, and then in front of a farm field.
I found a quote on the Rockford, Michigan website. Rockford's downtown shopping district is a wonderful step back in time. And it sounds like, from what you're saying, it is very sort of...
It is. Yeah. Being a kid, particularly, I was excited when we got our first like superstore. But yeah, everything would shut down at 5. Like you couldn't, like all the shops, I mean, everything. Like there was no nightlife for the most part.
And when does music start to come into it? Was it a musical household?
Yeah, my mom plays piano and played it pretty well. So she took piano lessons growing up. So when we were little, oh goodness, probably kindergarten or first grade. So maybe around 5 or 6, we started taking piano lessons from a teacher at the school that we went to. And so my mom thought it was important.
Why did she think so?
I don't know, to be honest. This is where my mom is very much like a tradition of like, I did this thing, so you should do it. Mm-hmm. I think she found it useful. Like she grew up going to church, and so being able to play at church, or maybe do some of those things, she found to be useful.
What was church part of your growing up, part of the community there?
Yes. Yep. We went to church quite a bit. Was raised Baptist.
Was there a music program at your school? Like, how's the flute going?
I think most schools like start recorder first. I missed it at both. We had to switch schools for a year and then go back because my parents, we couldn't afford the tuition for the private school 1 year. And then we ended up going back. But we had band and quote unquote orchestra or a string ensemble would start at our private school in 5th grade. So it was teeny tiny. I want to say it was like we had a saxophone, like maybe a couple trumpets. Like it was really, really small. And then the other kids were in the string ensemble. And then we switched schools but I was starting to really like music. My brother was always was into like gaming and computers. And so we switched to a public school that had far more or larger fine arts and technology offerings, and then the band programs there were big and really well funded.
When did you first start thinking about music as potentially taking a music degree at college? What was going through your mind?
I think it was maybe around my 9th or 10th grade in high school. I had a flute teacher she was really fantastic. Still teaches there. Actually, she knew me when I was a small child because my parents and her went to the same church.
Uh-huh.
And so, and she had a music degree. I was teaching full time and had kids and so forth. But she pushed me to do some like music camps over the summer, some like honor band situations, and like to really start to kind of stretch and see what was out there. I think it was there I started seeing like what could be possible, and really leaning into it.
Tell me about the Western Michigan University. Why did you pick to go there?
So when I was looking at where to study, there are like some private Christian colleges around. I did look at one, but got weird vibes in Chicago because it was very much like you go here to like find a partner, not to
Oh,
get
wow. What?
like it's just what it felt like.
Yeah.
Like there's a joke among like Christian women of like it's like they go there to get their MRS degree, their Mrs. degree, and definitely amongst most of the girls I went to private school with, that's the case, except for a few that are like doctors.
Did you know some who went there and kind of went that path?
Oh yeah, like one of my childhood best friends, like she went to school, got a degree, maybe worked for a year, and then was a stay-at-home mom. I mean, that's most of them were they pursued something, but it never like they wanted to be a homemaker. And there's no judgment in that. It's just that was something I knew I didn't want. So that one was out. I always knew I wanted a career of my own. And I was pretty blessed, even though my family was very conservative in that way. All of the women in my family, they would speak of this like traditional family structure, but that's not how it operated in practice. And
Yeah.
my mom is a nurse and had her own, career in that, still does. My grandmother eventually owned her own business as an interior decorator. Recently just retired from that. And then I had a aunt who was always extremely career driven. So
Strong women in your life.
yeah, so I always there was always this like juxtaposition of like, being raised within this traditional like quote unquote patriarchal structure, but yet in practice it's not what, it doesn't have to happen that way. And so I was blessed in that regard of getting to see that. And then particularly my mom had a best friend who was also a nurse who we got to know really well, and she chose not to have children, and she breeds and raises miniature dachshunds.
Oh.
And so we'd go over if there was puppies, and like it was always super fun. And so for me, like being raised in that like very traditional Christian of like what your purpose is on this earth is to like be a wife and mother, etc., to see somebody where it's like, oh, this is a choice. And I never felt that path for myself. And so seeing that it was possible, it was really great to have all of those kind of influences and role models from a young age to kind of shape where I chose to go.
So Western Michigan University, it is then at this point. Was it a competitive or collaborative atmosphere?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, any school of music in the U.S. is competitive. I know right now they're struggling to get students just in general, but like any private studio, unless they have multiple professors, like there's a certain number of slots So I think like our studio was 16 flutes. And when I auditioned, there was only 2 spots. So it was just me and somebody else that were accepted. But I was fortunate. During the audition, like the person or the professor was like, "Yeah, I'm going to accept you."
Yeah. Did they become your professor?
Yeah, she
Hmm.
did. And I worked with her before at Interlochen, and so knew I wanted to study with her just because of her approach and her instruction technique. So
Another strong woman.
yeah, and also a childless woman. So
Uh-huh.
um,
Yeah.
somebody where her flute students were her family, and she was really a great she was great to freshmen as they came in.
If I asked you then, what do you see yourself, as you graduate? What would you tell me? Who would you want to be?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't really know if I knew
Hmm.
as a freshman like what I wanted. I just knew I wanted to play, and there was a few different avenues, and I would figure it out.
What other avenues?
I mean, of course, there's like orchestral music is like the biggest one that is taught and talked about.
Hmm.
But I knew like there was more to like what supports that than I knew at the time. So yeah, I was kind of just like this, okay, I'm here to learn. These are the classes that I'm taking that you say I need to
Hmm.
get to
Hmm.
where I'm going. And then later in my career, I was just like, I don't know, I'm taking this, but um but at the time I was just like, okay, I have to learn this because I don't know this. And
Right. I'm curious, did the fundraising or administrative interest show itself in any way at that point yet?
it did during my undergrad for sure.
How did it happen?
I don't recall the precise moment, but I do. It was like my junior into senior year. There was a contemporary music ensemble that was formed by the director at the time, and so it was like a Pierrot Lunaire style of flute, clarinet, violin,
Uh-huh.
cello, percussion, piano. That was a lot of fun, and that was the first time I actually had a ton of fun of playing music compositions within the last 20 years or sooner. It was much more difficult, so that was fun. And through that, we were given scholarships
Uh-huh.
that was partially funded by a local chamber music organization, which I don't think is in existence anymore. That was like they would present, I think maybe like 6 to 8 chamber concerts per year. So we were part of the deal was like we had to intern there at this organization for the scholarship. So I started doing that, and so I met some wonderful arts administration people, one of which who was more in operations, and she was fantastic. And then the happened to be the clarinet professor at Western at the time, who then became the director and now is retired. His wife was principal flutist for Southwest Michigan Symphony and also was the lead like grant writer for this organization. I knew about her because obviously she was around, but like she was really busy and she also taught privately in a couple different ways. And so it was there I really got to kind of talk with her too and get to know her
What kinds of things do you remember talking about?
just about music, but also like, getting to see her and kind of the career that she had put together that was considered a portfolio career of she held a principal position.
Hmm.
She was working part-time at this chamber or like ensemble, and then she also taught privately here. So seeing kind of how she formulated, I think for me, seeing her and getting to talk with her was probably the main like impetus for deciding like what could be possible with my career because at least in our area, like having even the quote unquote full-time orchestras, like they pay pretty well, but like depending on where you would land, it was like, okay, it's not necessarily going to pay all the bills or you're going to be left with a ton of time on your hands because,
Yeah.
they're not performing as much. So
So you were aware of that already, like as a
yeah.
student, that it's hard to
Hmm.
to make it full time.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
After I graduated with my master's, I did another internship because I was trying to get foot in the door with arts admin. And so I took an unpaid internship and then worked nighttime at the orchestra, like selling tickets over the phone to people. And so, particularly with Baltimore Core, any opportunity is paid. For me, that was something that was huge of like how many arts nonprofits or nonprofits in general take advantage of those individuals seeking
Free labor,
that
right?
yeah, free labor,
Yeah.
hands-on experience. I worked all through college and because I had to pay bills and like seeing a lot of students who either didn't have to or they have
Yeah.
familial support or trust funds,
Yeah.
was there was that huge, obviously, to be blatantly honest with fine arts, it's like a lot of people that if they're able to really succeed, they have a large, support financially for them to be able to lean into that.
Yeah.
And so
Pay
it
to
is a
play.
pay to play. Yep, precisely.
So were you compensated when you did a lot of that extra work?
No.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clear that that's an issue close to your heart because you experienced that, and I'm glad to hear that Baltimore Corps is being fair to people.
Yeah. It's like you'd have really long days because you do free work during the day and then you'd go and you'd work at night and,
But it's
you
it's
know.
it's it's a musician's mindset in a sense, right? Like so
Yep.
often they say, "Oh no, like we can't pay you, but it's a great opportunity." You mentioned master's degree, and I did want to ask, like, what made you choose to pursue a master's degree in the first place? Because I know that you chose to take it in Ohio State. So yeah, what made you choose it, and why was it Ohio? Because that's probably the biggest change, one of the bigger changes moving from away from Michigan, from home.
Yeah, I think if I could do it again, I don't think I would go.
No.
I do think it made me a better player for sure at the time, and I think this is kind of the like a crux of everything, but I didn't feel like I was as good of a player as I needed to be in order to quote unquote make it. And I think a lot of performers had master's degrees to like deepen the skills, like the musical aspects. So it is harder because you have to really forge your path and like those skills are not taught in higher education. Like you're taught how to be an orchestral musician, but you're not taught like here's how you can go find grant funding to support or here's how you can form this and like this is what it takes to put on a production. Like there was maybe some survey courses that were kind of maybe being offered towards the end, but not particularly. It was like you just need to become a better player because it's highly competitive.
So was your degree, was it like a new music specialty, or is it something that
No.
you wanted to ideally make it if you could?
Yeah, it's something I wanted to ideally make it if I could, but didn't know how to get from point A to B.
Hmm.
I remember being like really feeling torn down in my master's because of course it was important that you play a Bach sonata as part of your
Finals.
as part of it precisely and I had to learn how to play Mozart and I was just like and then would be constantly told I was bad at it. I was bad at it. I was bad at it. I was like this is like not fun for me. I would zone out while playing a major ascending scale and would flub and I'm just because like it wouldn't hold my attention and I found if it was harder like I played like I really enjoyed learning Berlioz Sequenza for my degree,
Yeah.
and learning how to read spatial music and like I really like the saxophone professor really liked me because he was like, you play stuff that's like not fluty. And I'm like, okay, great. But it was those kind of things I really leaned into, and my professor would have some good feedback there, but not. She would really hound me about Bach and Mozart, and I just felt
Yeah.
like a really terrible flutist, and and I was like, but I don't enjoy these things. But
Yeah,
yet it
you're
was like,
bored out of your mind.
yeah, and everyone was really great with orchestral. So was she. She was an amazing orchestral musician. And I did enjoy it, but it was like the whole auditioning process I just found to be so it is what it is. It's a huge like head game. It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
there's a lot there. We all know it. And so I'm just like, this doesn't seem like a fun existence. And also like I can't afford to take that many auditions because I don't
Hmm.
have financial backing in that way I have to work full time to pay my rent, to put food on my table. Like it's a balance. And so I would take some auditions post graduating, but
Yeah.
um yeah.
So it sounds like you didn't quite at that point feel like you fitted in in Ohio State with the flute studio and what they were teaching, and it was hard to come by opportunities to pursue what you were really interested in, and then the financial strain of just again being a musician. Did it lead you to think about transitioning out of music? Where were you sort of at the end of postgraduate, the master's degree? Did you have a plan?
Yeah, like I said, I was taking some orchestral auditions.
Yeah.
But again, I just like the intense practicing and everything,
The time investment.
the time investment and like traveling was just really a lot. And then I knew I wanted to maybe start leaning more into like arts administration. So maybe working at an orchestra or something in combination with performing. And so that's when I moved back to Rockford and lived with my parents for a bit, which was not a fun time while I was, making very little money. I had a lot saved up from work because I had to work part-time while interning for a stint to try to, land a job. And so I did actually apply. There was an opening at Grand Rapids Symphony, but didn't get it, which was one of those things of like when you're just starting out, you have to have some level of experience. But for the pay, it's really funny. Like,
What do you mean?
like an entry level position in like I think it was a communications and marketing position. They want a certain level of experience, but the pay is pretty low.
Right.
And I had just interned, but I knew it was like I know I have the skills, I have the drive, I have the determination. You just have to take a chance. And so
Take a chance to do what? To transition out of music?
to do something I've never done before, like, but yeah, like when you're trying to look for an arts admin job, it's like I can do this, I can do, just let me do it.
Uh-huh.
So finding that employer that's willing to take a chance. And then there was a job that was being posted actually at Western, um, that I applied for and ended up getting. It was a part-time job to start learning some of those things. So
You talked about it earlier, but like making the leap, right? And believing that you can do it, and then sort of finding opportunities to do it, like changing it to music admin, for example. I wondered whether you had to think about transferable skills from the performance degree. I felt when I started looking at those things that I had no skills.
mhm.
I knew nothing, but I knew I could do the work. I just couldn't really explain it to myself. I'm not even talking about somebody else, of like how I can do it, and it's a problem. It's really hard to do, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how you overcame it.
Yeah. I think for me, especially being an artist, or a musician in particular, it's like there's a lot of skills that you learn that even today in like day to day working with folks, I can tell who did that or who has that kind of ingrained in them. And one of which is like playing in an ensemble. You learn how to, particularly like I always enjoyed, I did like playing principal, but I got way too nervous anytime for an orchestral concert. I don't know. I
Yeah,
really enjoyed playing second mostly because I found it fun to try to imitate other people or to like fit within their style. Like it's much harder versus setting your own. Although that is hard to like this is the tone, but I found it more fun to like rotate and like sub and figure out how to like support another player and make them sound better, imitate their style. For me it was more fun. Like it was more of a game.
it was more interesting than playing Mozart or Bach.
Precisely, like, so for me, that, like, kept me alive and kept me doing that kind of life. It was fun to, like, play with different people from all over and learn and kind of morph. So that makes for a really great leader and also colleague, I would say.
Being able to follow and listen and adjust.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
But also, like, support people. I think oftentimes we glean too much into leaders as being these visionary, high or big picture thinkers,
Yep.
which are needed, but like sometimes, but they're not the ones executing. Like, they have this idea, but they're not the ones to say, how do we get from A to Z? And then also if there's maybe, when you're in an orchestra and you hear, okay, the second oboe has a solo here, I need to back off, and it's in this part of the register that's not very audible. Like you have to know what is, the instrument strengths, what are like the timbre, what is the harmonic series of each, especially in woodwinds, because it's not the same across every instrument like it
Yeah.
is or as similar in brass or strings. So you have to know the ins and outs to know how to best support and make each other shine. And I think that makes for a really amazing leader, but also a colleague in your day job. And because of that collaborative nature too, when you're like, we have a gig here, who's bringing this piece of equipment, like got to show up at this time, make sure you have these things. It really makes for an accountable colleague, and also you can be counted on to do this. And because of so many skills are not taught that we use in our field as musicians, you really have to learn how to be self-sufficient and then figure it out. And so I think that makes for that's a skill that I'm finding more and more that not everybody has. And they want to be told what to do or told where the info is.
I wonder almost sometimes whether we as musicians don't have the language to describe those skills that's understandable to professional organizations. And I wondered, as somebody like in a role of a director, whether you had to hire anybody or been involved with that, and whether like we could translate some of maybe one or two of those terms we mentioned before into job speak. So, for example, things that you were talking about make me think about emotional intelligence. It makes me think of a word that's used a lot in job search, self-starter, which I never quite understood. Like self-starter, does it mean at work or does it mean like I run my own business? Things like that. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I definitely think, I know I've put in a job description before, like the word like being curious, a problem solver for sure. My work in particular, like we are very human centered. This I think in some ways makes itself into music, and when we talk about emotion, but we look at orchestras and so oftentimes it's, look at how many people could fill this seat if you don't play this perfectly or you don't do this and that's wrong. And also it leads towards, not as much creativity and being able to take chances, which I think is highly important, particularly in practice. So I know having a human centered approach and like you are the product, you are the important thing, and how can we develop you into that, I think is important. I think the term like lifelong learner comes to mind as well.
Right.
We always taught, like sometimes to a fault, like that you can always do something better and you should always be learning and growing and improving. But I do think that is really essential when I'm trying to hire somebody, to want to make sure that they're always striving to make the work product better.
And kind of shifting towards Baltimore Corps and sort of what you do now, what's one thing that maybe you took from classical music into your sort of new profession?
I think for me, yeah, the collaborative nature and also supporting others is a huge part of what I do right now. Particularly in development work, we tend to touch every part of the organization, whether they like it or not.
So taking responsibility, sort of taking ownership of things, how does it look?
Yeah, well, like if you look at a grant, for example, it takes, development team, finance with budget and tracking expenses, for, pulling that all together. And then also working with program staff and leadership to make sure what you're putting forth in the proposal is doable, is attainable. You have to confer with a lot of different people, gather a lot of different information, but then you also see if like something is not being thought through or maybe there's a gap there. So being able to, process a lot of information coming in, kind of see the gaps and like ask to fill it in. It's really similar. Like if you're working in a chamber ensemble and you're rehearsing and it's like, okay, and you're negotiating tempo, you're negotiating what to bring forth, like what the style is. A lot of those skills that you learn there are really helpful. Particularly, I mean, not every studio has this, but I was fortunate to be in studios where it was built in that you would give critical feedback, but in a supportive lens. A way to talk through and give feedback in a productive way is incredibly important, especially when you're talking and working with artists, because a lot of what you are producing is coming from you and is very personal. So being able to do it in a human-centered and kind way.
Empowering way, in a way.
Yes. And that I think has really helped me in my day-to-day job. There's very few people that I butt heads with. And not that you can't, we do have difficult conversations, but you're able to have it from a constructive way. And it's like, it's about this, piece of the work. It's not about you or me, and you're able to kind of work through it where, you have the same conversation with somebody else who maybe didn't have that training or wasn't in an organized sport. And, it's different, but I'm pretty blessed in my day job that everybody's very much, attuned with that. So
yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hearing like various things, but one of them is like all those small decisions that you make at every turn in a chamber ensemble, being able to communicate that and be empowering other people, and as you said, giving it in a productive way, and then also having that full picture of what is the end result, and as you said, where the gaps come from. So like having both of those at the same time in your head, while also things shifting and changing and sort of remaining on top of that. What about the other question of what can we take from fundraising and this field to music?
That's a big one. There's a couple of things. The one is too big to talk about, but that is the obvious that what is being taught and perpetuated is like, European excellence as far as in music and a very narrow focus and that scarcity mindset of you have to be amazing and the top to make it when the reality is there are not as many jobs in what is being taught. So that's not true.
Right.
The truth is the career, the sector is much larger and higher education conservatories need to adjust to support the current job market. I've really come to terms with that recently and get, very fiery about it because, for a while I felt bad about, or you feel like you're a failure, but it's like, no, I'm not a failure. I have forged something of which I was not taught whatsoever. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And fantastic. But yeah, if you run into your old professors, they always ask you the same thing of like, are you still playing? And I find that really funny and also kind of patronizing of this isn't for me, it's for you. You want to make sure that what you taught me is maybe still in my life.
You get that odd look when you say no or not as much. I mean, I always feel like I try to soften it for the same reason because it feels like you're admitting something.
Yeah, and it's taken me a while to be prideful, to be like, "No," and actually, despite what you taught, not you specifically, but the institution, like, this is, actively what is out there, and you guys are severely behind. It'd be like teaching a medical professional for practicing in the 1950s, versus now. It's just so for me, that's the biggest thing that has to shift, and also not there's not just one art form. So many people will turn on a pop music song when they're feeling sad to
Yeah.
connect with something, and that's a very valid art form and not taught, and it's looked down upon, which is wrong. But particularly from fundraising that I have seen, which I think musicians are pretty abysmal at, is this is a very narrow focus, but I think it applies bigger, is that if you're writing like a grant proposal and like particularly the Maryland State Arts Council asks a question like, why is this work needed? Why is it important? A lot of people really cannot answer that, or musicians are terrible at it. Anytime I've been on panels and you read the answers and they're like, because it's music and people need to hear it. It's Mozart. People just don't know about Mozart. And you're like, but that's not why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And I was really guilty of that forever of like, well, why am I studying this? Why do I like this? Is it needed? Is this, concert, what is actually drawing people to that concert? It's not to hear you. Well, it is sometimes, like we have
Hmm.
Emmanuel Pahoods where you're like, yes, I will go and see you no matter what. So I think it's getting down to why are we doing what we're doing? What's the bigger purpose and draw? And what does music actually do for people, for community? What is its, intent and like, and it can have a wide variety of answers, but I think getting down to the why of what and how we are doing it. And then if we don't have a good answer, maybe really examining that, just because you think it's this, really cool to hear Beethoven,
Hmm.
it's not as needed as it once was. Also, it's a very expensive art form, which is why orchestras are, folding because
Yeah.
there's less of an interest. It's very expensive. You also have modern transportation to where back home, back in the day, I wouldn't have been able to, play in 3 different orchestras that were within an hour radius of each other because I had a car. I have friends that take up multiple seats in orchestras in Ohio that I went to school with, where, back in the day, that wouldn't be possible. It'd be held maybe by 4 different flutists versus 1 person. So you have 1 person taking up and monopolizing,
Yeah.
you know, and so for me that there's a lot of modernization of which has really structured how we survive today in this field, and we aren't as agile because of, being kind of what we're taught, or and then some that are then seen as being, they didn't make it. And so I think just really leaning into kind of the why of everything and being able to examine that for me is really crucial.
I'm also hearing why we're doing it and also who are we doing it for. And that actually ties in one
Yeah.
of the questions I wanted to ask you in particular because of your community work and because of your experience and all of that. Sort of tying everything in, is there a community-centric musician in the 21st century and how does it look like?
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how everything transpires, but I think in general, musicians, artists are highly collaborative in nature. Not necessarily as many visual artists because it's done and it can be done more insular. Um, but musicians in general, I think, are very highly collaborative and want to work together. And so I think, breaking out of those silos in particular and acknowledging other excellence within the art form.
Silos of what?
Like, if you look at, like, an orchestral musician, like so for me particularly, like, I really wish, and I could do this at some point, but learning more improv skills to be able to be more versatile. I get really hung up if there's not notes on the page, and being able to break free from that and learn a wider skill set would be really helpful. But
Hmm.
one thing that's been nice about moving to Baltimore is that even though there is a very large kind of traditional conservatory in Peabody, and then of course like tons of colleges surrounding with great music programs that are still kind of teaching those avenues, Baltimore in general is very highly collaborative and the artists here are very supportive of one another.
Yeah.
So it's getting to see that versus where I came, like artists were supportive, but it was like kind of within like these confines. There was a Bach festival, there was a sacred music festival, we had an orchestra, we had like another orchestra as a community orchestra I played with for free, but it was still very like, okay, these people do more folk type music, so they're in their niche. We do more orchestral music. But in Baltimore, I would say that is broken far more times. There's far more sense of community within the artists here and then collaboration and also urge to want to try new things and see what works. To me, that's been exciting to see. And there is more support um, from local arts councils, and then there's a larger population of people wanting to go and see that as well.
How do you feel about music now?
Uh,
Loaded question.
yeah, I guess for me in particular, I tend to get really fiery about it, but it's something that I feel like has been weaponized, particularly in higher education and conservatories of, like I said, upholding, the European canon as being excellence. I feel like there's been a lot of harm done of discrediting at formal institutions and also like, there are lots of BIPOC composers of which are left out of music history that are taught. Same with theory examples. It could start there of programming, chamber ensemble pieces by a wider variety, but then also across genres and same thing, orchestral pieces. Like, yes, it's important to learn Bach in a safe environment, but it's equally important to play a Florence Price piece and then also work by living composers. That's not done. I find that really, really weird to me.
Yeah.
And these pieces usually can be pretty difficult. There are ones that are more attainable to those that are learning, but it's really weird to not support living artists at an educational institution. Like to me, there's a huge disconnect of like you're not supporting the current artists and job market. You're wanting to perpetuate these, 100-year-old dead composers continuously. There's a huge disconnect again between, if you're teaching a museum art form, great, name it, do it. That's what
Right.
you specialize in, but don't claim that, we're helping you get jobs when you're not. So for me, music, like it comes with that type of perspective of I feel like I was very ill prepared and then also taught something that and it's harder as you get older and you have a full-time job to learn and to have the time to unlearn. And so, like, if I could go back, it would be really important to me to do that all and push for it more. Had I have known back in, my college days, because I didn't know. It's just like, oh yeah, you have to learn this stuff. Yeah, it's a something that's always on my mind. Yeah. And it's always easier too to perpetuate, which like so I think I always have some like self like I don't know if it's guilt or shame of like I should be learning more of these things. I do feel that really deeply of like I have a personal responsibility if I were to really return into that realm. Because it is all too easy to be like, oh, I learned this piece when I was your age, so you're gonna learn it too. So going back to kind of the start of our conversation of like, you and your parental and like upbringing, like it's always easier to like recirculate
Yeah, we,
things.
we did it that way, so you're gonna do it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and final question: future ambitions apart from sick improvisation skills.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I don't know. I think eventually I really enjoy where I'm at right now. Like I said, I'm really able to help other people lean into their, learning gap and, helping them figure out where they want to go, what they want to pursue. all while being paid to do it, I think is extremely important. Particularly as we're like right now, we have a community health pathways program that's, an AmeriCorps program.
And just to clarify, AmeriCorps, it's work for younger people, maybe high school age or around then, that's paid, and that's, is it physical work or practical work?
It can be a very wide range. Our program is structured because it's the public health program through AmeriCorps, so it's people that want to learn are interested in serving their community and maybe getting a community health worker certificate at the end of the programs. This program is highly important of people wanting to get into the healthcare sector that are otherwise overlooked because they don't have that certificate yet, but it takes time and it takes money to get there. So that's what we're doing to help them. But also, like, they want a career change, they want to work with and serve their community. And so, how can they do that? And how can we also get more people of Baltimore City working in the healthcare sectors versus a large percentage of our like hospitals here and healthcare institutions are people coming from outside of the city to work. When there's a lot of people in the city that have all the skills and then some to be able to perform those jobs.
And in a funny way, we kind of come full circle to transferable skills and opportunity and a chance to give your best shot and change what you do, and being supported through that change, and perhaps seeing a broader field than what you've been told, and you playing sort of a role in it through Baltimore Corps. It's wonderful. I think that was a great chat, Dannielle. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I really enjoyed it.
Of course. Anything for you, Ivan.
Thank you for listening. I was reflecting on the conversations that I have been having, and it made me think about the sheer variety of experiences and stories that are connected to classical music. I am proud to share them with you, and I am grateful to you for listening, because you are an important part of this project. It would not be complete without you. If you like the podcast, as always, please share it with another person, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you in the future. Have a great day, wherever you are.